Hello everyone, this is Pico Entertainment and we're back again, and here now we have another video for you, and in looking forward to the upcoming release of The Matrix Resurrections, the fourth film within the Matrix franchise, I thought it would be appropriate to look back on the Matrix trilogy and its overall legacy and impact. Now I've previously reviewed the first film within the franchise and you can check that out within the channel, and I will leave a link within the description. So in this review we will look at the second film within the franchise, The Matrix Reloaded. Released in May the 15th, 2003, it stars Keanu Reeves, Carrie Moss, Laurence Fishburne, Hugo Weaving, Jada Pinkett Smith, and it was directed by the back then Wachowski brothers. Now the setup within the Matrix Revolution is that we continue the universe set within the first film, where we establish a future where humans, following a devastating war against sentient machines, are now kept captive in a simulated reality known as the Matrix. A certain group of survivors have managed to break free of the capture of the machines, and they have evaded their rule, keeping refuge in the underground ruins of Zion. Led by Morpheus from the first film, he liaises with the higher council of the human population, who alert the fact that there is an impending arrival of a sentinel attack which will arrive within the city of Zion within 72 hours. Continuing his belief that Neo is the saviour who will free all of humankind from the rule of the machines, Morpheus takes Neo and Trinity back into the Matrix to search for a program known as the Oracle. Hoping that meeting the Oracle, she will help provide the answers in ultimately defeating the machines. It is also revealed that Agent Smith, the program designed to eliminate all threats within the Matrix, has become far more in control of his own free will and has ambitions to break away from the Matrix program himself. As the story progresses, Neo learns more of his potential destiny, the true origin of himself and the Matrix also. He eventually faces an ultimate choice which could determine the fate of Trinity and also the human population within Zion. Now when we look at The Matrix Reloaded, it really is such a typical example of a sequel following a hugely iconic blockbuster which exceeded all expectations on a relatively smaller budget, which certainly had a more contained and concise plot and narrative. Now when you have an example of an original film like this, the studio very much wants the sequel because they want more money, of course, and now the sequel following the first film has much higher expectations, of which there is a certain pressure to surpass those expectations. So now everything has to be amplified. Now you have to have a longer runtime, bigger action scenes, bigger effects, bigger world building, more exposition, more supporting characters, and all of this is done on a much bigger budget. Whereas the first film tends to be a lot tighter, leaner and more complete in terms of a story, the sequel now has to expand and as a result can become over-bloated, overlong and excessive. Also, the novelty and discovery and surprise of the first film is now gone, especially if you repeat the same premise as the original movie. Now these elements are really the main issues within The Matrix Reloaded. The first film itself had a complete story, and if we think about it, really there was no need to continue it. The second film then has to justify its existence in building the universe, and as a result it can struggle to make these elements as interesting and compelling as what they were within the first film. And this is very evident certainly in the first 30 to 40 minutes, where we concentrate far more on a human population within Zion, their hopes and their fears. Overall, the population, some of them support Morpheus in his overall beliefs, but some doubt him. People show concerns over their own future, and we get far more depth into the overall community within Zion. We also get a truly strange slow motion rave dance sequence, and we also get another scene where we see Morpheus making a big huge speech towards the human population. And we also get more in terms of the love connection between Neo and Trinity. So all of this world building is really what the Wachowskis felt they had to do in order to justify the sequel. Now don't get me wrong, more world building can be very much of a good thing, but unfortunately in terms of the Matrix itself, none of this extra narrative is particularly interesting. Remember, the core appeal of the first film was the Matrix world itself, being plunged into this world and trying to find out and discover whether it was reality or not, seeing all of the various action set pieces and everybody exhibiting these certain abilities and powers. Now this is because there's not too much that you can really do in terms of the outside world when we're talking about Zion and the underground humans and the battle in the machines outside. You're very much dealing with a barren wasteland in terms of no other locations. The aesthetic is pretty much the same in terms of the barren landscapes that we see throughout this film, so there's not much range that you can do in terms of the second part of the Matrix trilogy. And because we get such a huge amount of focus in the first act of this film, Matrix Reloaded really tends to drag in its first overall act. Now the suggestion of the Matrix being the most interesting element is ultimately proven right, as to once we do enter the Matrix, shortly around the 40-minute mark, and we see Neo encounters Agent Smith for the first time, this is when the movie truly comes alive, providing much of the pace and energy and action and spectacle that we saw from the first film. The next following hour after this is absolutely great, where we get a huge assortment of wonderfully staged action sequences full of great fight choreography, explosions, slow motions, shootouts and car chases, and in many ways it's this stage of the movie that truly becomes the sequel that I think you would want to see following the first film. And this segment of the movie is driven by 3 truly standout scenes. So the first of these is of course Neo fighting off against the multiple Agent Smiths, the often called Birdie Brawl, where we see him encountering maybe 50 to 100 versions of Agent Smith itself. Now throughout the sequence, yes, there are clearly a few weak points in terms of the CGI. You do have to remember that this was really the first type of sequence that we had seen in a major blockbuster, and this was very much in keeping with the Wachowski's intent in terms of the first film and trying to push the boundaries in what we would see in terms of visual effects on screen. But despite the few weak spots, it's still a very exciting and visually compelling set piece. We then have the absolutely superb encounter between Neo and the Merovingian's men on the staircase, the Merovingian being another system program set within the Matrix, and this is absolutely an outstanding sequence, again full of great spectacle and wire work and fight moves, accompanied by a great soundtrack. I love all of the various angles and slow motions as we see Neo and the other soldiers leaping across the staircase and running along the wall upside down. It's all fantastic to watch. We then get the incredible bike chase scene where Trinity is helping the Keymaker evade the agents by driving the wrong way within traffic. There's a great kinetic movement and momentum surrounding this sequence overall. Fantastic pace as well throughout the scene. We get other great shots where we see Morpheus slicing down the car and then jumping off a lorry later on as he's fighting one of the agents, as Neo flies around to rescue them as the lorry explodes. It's all fabulous spectacle, great stunt work and staging, and another great use of a musical soundtrack. I also like the 2 twin white dreadlock samurais. They have this ability where they can really morph in and out of surfaces, become invisible and then visible again. So they were very outstanding in terms of visual effect as well. And of course, we have to mention, for me and for many others watching this movie, perhaps the most stunning effect feature within all of the sequences throughout this film with no CGI, and that is of course Monica Bellucci appearing all tight figure in her white dress. Here she plays the Merovingian's wife in many ways. Not really substantial in terms of her overall performance, but again, just seeing Monica Bellucci in that white dress is always worth a mention when going over this movie. Perhaps the most perfect live action Wonder Woman that we didn't get throughout this overall time. Now in terms of this movie, we do have to talk about the supposed climactic scene where Neo meets the architect, discovering his true origin, that he is only one of a select group created by the Matrix to test the overall program itself. Now this scene has been very much one of contention throughout people who have watched this movie. Some people feel it adds a lot of the exposition and the philosophical context throughout this film. Other feels that it's overdone in terms of the prolonged expositionary and really takes a lot of the pace throughout the movie. Now I'm somebody who's in the latter of this stage. I think this is a scene that was just overdone and in many ways was typical of the overall sequel itself, in just adding too much that wasn't really that necessarily. The architect himself uses all of this incomprehensible dialogue and tone, and really when you're watching it for the first time, I can remember what exactly is he talking about, why are we spending so much time over here. And I really think that this scene really drained a lot of the momentum that the film had built up, certainly within the last 40 minutes. Now the movie itself did end on some sort of cliffhanger where we see that Neo has the ability to disarm the sentinels in the actual reality, and then we also see that Agent Smith has managed to escape the real world in the form of another soldier known as Bane. So they did leave some sort of interest going ahead into the third film, The Matrix Revolutions, but when I look back on The Matrix Reloaded, I honestly think it's a sequel. When we really viewed the overall narrative, it really is unnecessary. In the first film we established the existence of the Matrix and Neo and his abilities and the outside world of Zion and the war against the machines, and then later on when we talk about The Matrix Revolutions, we then go into far more of the last stand and the war effort from the humans to fight off against the machines, and also we get the final confrontations of course between Agent Smith and Neo. So when you look at that side of things, The Matrix Reloaded isn't really needed, right? It doesn't really move the narrative forward in any way that you couldn't have established in the third film overall, and I think that's probably one of the biggest issues surrounding the sequel itself. So if I had to give an overall score for The Matrix Reloaded, I would give it a 6.5 out of 10. As I mentioned before, amazing action set pieces, and fight choreography and visual effects, very much of a step up, I would say, in terms of the standard, if maybe not the overall imagination of the first film. But unfortunately, that excitement is bogged down by, I think, an over-exposition, very much introducing too many elements that aren't really that interesting or compelling outside of the Matrix. And as I mentioned before, you really feel that this is a middle chapter, that a lot of the elements could have been incorporated into the third film overall. So when we look at the overall release of The Matrix Reloaded, on a budget of around 150 million, it did manage to gross over 739.4 million at the box office. So it was a huge commercial success, and at the time it was actually the highest grossing R-rated film of all time, and shortly after its release it did hold the record for being the top grossing film of 2013, before later on being surpassed by Lord of the Rings Return of the King. Now, it did generally gain positive reviews, but many did cite the over-expositionary elements. Some people felt that the sequel was a bit too bloated and overblown. Matrix Reloaded is really a typical example of when, after having to work with certain constraints in the first film, you now give the filmmakers all of these big toys to play with. And whilst everything is amplified and we do get more expansion, we in many ways lose a lot of those crucial elements that made the first film so special overall. So those are my overall thoughts and feelings and review of The Matrix Reloaded. Let me know what you think in the comments below. As I mentioned at the start of this video, I will shortly provide reviews of The Matrix Revolutions, the third film within this franchise, and of course when The Matrix Resurrections opens for release on December the 22nd, 2021, I will provide both a non-spoiler review and a spoiler review of that film when it's released, so look out for that as well within the overall channel. Please also hit and like those subscription and notification buttons so I can provide you with more high quality content like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, stay safe distances, and I will see you very, very soon.